All right, Margot is having some technical issues, but we are going to get started. We are recording this, and this is not just for folks that can't get in, but folks that want to share. If you feel like after this meeting, you want to share what we learned today or what you learned today with others, we will post the recording as soon as it's done. And cool, I'll just go ahead and get started by quickly kind of introducing the meeting, introducing Debbie and having Debbie kind of help us introduce the topic, and then I'll just kind of go through who's here with me from my team. So welcome. This is our Regulatory and Enforcement Subcommittee meeting. This is our 5th meeting. Every meeting has really been a deep dive into a different topic. And when we first started this process in the middle of last year, we collectively as a committee sort of decided to try our best. We've jumped around a little bit, but to go sort of in order of the highest sort of emission source in the community, or at least try to start there, and then kind of deep dive into community concerns based on level of emissions. So we have done an on-road heavy-duty trucks discussion. Off-road equipment is actually next in line, and we haven't gotten there yet, but that's something we'll talk about at the end of today, as setting something like that up. And then in terms of area-wide sources, or sources that aren't really like one particular point, we talked about dust enforcement. And so next on the agenda, and we'll actually show you in context where it is in the emissions inventory, or how it compares to other sources, is today's topic. And today's topic is biomass power plants, and in particular there's one actually in the community, and it's DTE Stockton. So I just want to thank you all for being here. Thank you for helping us kind of drive the last few meetings by having topics scheduled out in advance. And maybe I'll pass it to Debbie to sort of give us a little context. She's helped us kind of review the presentation and the materials for today.
So today we're going to learn all about biomass and how it affects our air quality. And I'm excited about this topic because I don't know all that much about it. And I didn't realize that we even had one in the community. So I am excited to learn. And who is doing the presentation today?
I'm doing that. I'm doing a part of it. So.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll introduce kind of the group of people, because it's kind of a tag team a little bit. And just so folks know, we obviously do have a lot of district staff on today, but that's because this is a very different topic. And so we kind of try to bring different people in that have those different skill sets. So quickly, I'll go around and I'll just have you wave when I say your name. So Mark Rasmussen, he's been at every one of these meetings. He's our program manager up in the north for our compliance team. We have Nick Pierce. He is the engineering manager up north for the permit services engineering team. And you're going to hear from someone on each of their teams today. The first up will be Jag. He is a senior engineer up in the Northern Region office. And when I say Northern Region office, let me clarify. We do have an office, I think most of you know this, in Modesto. And it houses primarily engineering staff and compliance staff. So they're closest to all of the facilities up north. And then Jag is going to kick us off. Mark is going to provide a little bit of context, and then Samuel Palmquist is a senior engineer senior air quality inspector on our compliance team, and is familiar with DTE Stockton. He has done that inspection before and been the assigned inspector there. And we also have James Heriter, who is a senior. I'm going to get this wrong. He is an engineer on our team. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, supervising.
Supervising, I knew that. I was like, I didn't want to misappropriate that. So he is a supervising engineer. So as you can see from the senior supervising kind of manager levels I just described, we have a lot of experience sitting on this call to help kind of answer questions and direct you all.
Wonderful.
That's who's here from us. And yeah, we're excited, Debbie.
I have one little comment first. Last meeting, I kind of brought up that I'd like to get everybody's idea of different possible regulations in relation to this specific topic. So as we're going through all this, let's think of what the says and what possibly we can come up with in relation to this topic. Just a suggestion.
Okay, and
so
maybe
at
what
the
I can
end,
do,
we'll do
yeah,
that.
yeah. What I can do then is facilitate at the end, Debbie, I can go over kind of what we do when we have rulemaking processes, because this is a little different than some of the other CERT things we've done. But definitely feel free to ask all the questions and maybe it will facilitate or think or start in your mind an idea. And when there is a rulemaking process or an opportunity, or even an idea that you have now, and we can kind of write that down and keep that in mind. So that'd be great. I love that.
Sounds good.
I see a 209670. I'm not sure if that's Margot.
4442.
4442.
That's Margot.
Yay! We are so excited to have you on here. Excellent. Awesome. Okay. So with that, I think Mark is going to start sharing his screen. And so Jag, you can just say next slide whenever you're ready.
Okay.
And we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. My name is Jack Collin. I'm a senior engineer with the Air District here in Modesto office. And I'm quite familiar with the DTE Stockton facility as well as their equipment and various state-of-the-art mission control equipment there. Next slide, please. So this facility is a biomass facility which basically burns the woody waste in a controlled manner, and they generate electricity. The facility is located on the southeast corner of Washington Street and Stork Road. Here in the left picture, you can see where the location is relative to the boundary of AB 617 community. And on the right side is a close-up aerial view of the facility. Next slide, please. Okay, so DTE Stockton basically is a biomass to electric generation type facility. It's a 54 megawatt generation plant, which is roughly powers about 40,000 houses. As far as the fuel, there they primarily use clean biomass, basically orchard prunings and orchard material, any kind of organic material derived from the plants. That's what they use. And they do have a startup boiler, which is a natural gas fired kind of a startup burner there. Basically, I wanted to go over how the setup is. They have a boiler in which they combust the biomass, and the boiler produces steam, and the steam is injected into the steam turbine, which is connected to the electrical generator that produces the electricity. So that's how, in a simplified manner, that's how the process operates. So the emissions from the boiler are controlled with the state-of-the-art control technologies. First the exhaust from the boiler is injected with the trona. It's a sorbent, basically. It's a sodium carbonate sorbent that basically binds with or reacts with various sulfur dioxide and other acid gases. And what it does, it basically creates a sulfates, which is what we call it a particulate matter. And then the entire stream goes through cyclones. Cyclones basically remove the bigger particles out of the air exhaust stream. And then the lighter particles then move on to the electrostatic precipitator, which basically charge the particles, the inlet particles, and the electrodes basically have a different charge. So it basically, all the particulates end up in the electrostatic precipitator. It sticks to their plates, and then the plates are wrapped and all the material, the particulate collected there, it falls into enclosed conveying equipment. From there, they basically convey the material into the silos. So then the treated gas, basically the exhaust gas, is then passed through the SCR system, what we call it a selective catalytic reduction system. And that is used to basically treat oxides of nitrogen, or what we call it a NOx. You know, it basically reacts with NOx. There's a ammonia basically they use to react with the NOx, and it forms an elemental nitrogen and oxygen, you know. And then the exhaust stream is passed through the acid scrubber, which removes any kind of H2S or other acid gases that are present in the exhaust stream. So the exhaust stream then goes out into the air after running through all these running through these control devices. So basically, NOx, particulate matter, SOx, acid gases, all are removed prior to the gases discharged into the atmosphere. Next slide, please.
Jag, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Oftentimes folks will tell us that they see something coming off of, you know, like something which maybe like looks like something is coming out of the stack.
Yeah.
Can you describe, like, if they're seeing something, what are they probably most likely seeing, or what is that comprised of?
So most of the time it is you know, because of the temperature difference on cold days, you may see like a steam of water vapors coming off of the stack, you know, that may be visible during the cold days, you know. In rare cases, you may see slight visible emissions, but we have conditions in their permit that their visible emissions shouldn't exceed more than 20% opacity. But given that they have a state-of-the-art controls, they shouldn't have they should have minimal emissions as far as the particulate matter.
So that steam
concerned.
is like water vapor that's gone through all of those like control technologies that you just described.
Yes. What basically the exhaust contains water vapors, and exhaust is hot, and the outside temperature is you know, at a low temperature. So as it goes from the higher temperature to the lower temperature, it basically condenses, or it forms a kind of a visible type steam type thing. It looks like emissions, but it's not emissions. It's the water vapors that are condensing into the atmosphere. So that's what you see. But
Can I ask a question real quick?
yeah, sure.
This is Debbie. Now you said it's removed, the NOx, and I don't know if you could go back to the previous screen. The NOx, the particulate matter, and the SOx and acid gas, that's removed, correct? And where does that go?
It's basically, you know, so the exhaust contain all these gases, right? SOx, acid gases, and stuff like that. So when trona reacts with these gases, it forms a particulate, what we call it as sulfates. So it binds with it. Imagine it's like a soaking, you know. So, and it reacts, it forms sulfates or sulfites, you know, and then it becomes a particulate, like a really powder. Basically, trona is a powder. Trona is a sodium carbonate that's in the powder form that's injected into the exhaust stream, and it forms, it reacts with SOx at like around 650 degree Fahrenheit or so, and it forms a sulfate, and that sulfate is that sulfate is exhaust stream with the sulfates is run through the cyclones to remove the bigger particles. And then the exhaust stream is discharged through the electrostatic precipitator to even further reduce the emissions into the air.
Okay.
And same thing with the acid gases, basically, sodium carbonate. It's the same thing that they use in Alka-Seltzer or in Tums. It basically, it reacts with the acid, it reduces it neutralizes the acid, basically.
Okay.
Same thing happens in the wet scrubber. Any residual that's not reacted with the dry powder, it gets pushed through the scrubber, where they again use sodium hydroxide, another chemical. Same effect. It basically neutralizes the acid, and then the clean gas goes out.
And they dump that somewhere? That's dumped somewhere?
The wet scrubber, so the solids from the electrostatic precipitator are conveyed into an enclosed conveyor, and then it goes into one of the two silos they have. And from the silos, they basically load that into, they run that basically, because it's a dry product, and then they run it through it's called a pug mill. Basically, it injects the water into the dry ash, and it makes it into a small pellets, basically, and then they load the pellets. But that's a different permit, but it's very controlled. We require them to use telescopic spouts and all the other stuff if they want to load the dry stuff. It has to be pretty controlled.
Okay.
So that's under a separate permit. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay.
So regarding their permit, basically their permit has very strict emission limitations, and the permit alone for the boiler has about 79 conditions that they have to comply with, and that's not including the facility-wide conditions, 40 or 50 conditions that they have to comply with, and that includes about 20 district and federal regulations, including the recently amended rule conditions 4352, the rule requirements for 4352. The permit also includes emission testing. So we require them to test emissions on an annual basis for all pollutants. We require them to monitor pretty much every minute of various pollutants, and we require all the record keeping that Sam will talk about a little bit later in the slides. So the permit has built all these emission limitations that they have to comply with. All the source testing is included in there. We closely monitor their various emissions, as well as when we inspect them, we do look at their records and make sure that they are complying with all the requirements in the permit. And like I said, permit only allows them to burn clean wood residue. No treated woods are allowed. Only plant-based material. And the permit has emission limits on various pollutants, like I said, NOx, CO. CO is a carbon monoxide, volatile organic compound, particulate matter, any kind of sulfur dioxide, hydrochloric acid, ammonia, there are, and these restrictions are basically on an daily, quarterly, annually. So it's checked at multiple intervals throughout the year, basically. And do you have any question on this slide?
No.
Okay. So next slide, please. Okay, to ensure that they're complying with with all these permitted limits, we required them to install, or they have a SIMS system, which is a continuous emissions monitoring system, to monitor NOx, CO, and sulfur dioxide emissions. They also have, basically these systems are tied to our district database system, where they poll the data to us, and we look at, we closely monitor that data, basically to ensure that they are always operating in compliance with these NOx, CO, and SOx limits. And they also have an opacity meter. Opacity meter basically tells us, that, hey, if there are some visible emissions, is the electrostatic precipitator doing okay, or is it operating within the limits. Also, for the ESP, we require them to monitor the power. We wanted to make sure that electrostatic precipitator is operating properly and operating with the required control efficiencies and stuff like that. So, and in addition to that, the last one is a wet scrubber. Basically, for that, we require them to monitor the pH of the solution that they are using, to make sure that it stays within the tested limits. Basically, like I said, we require them to test for SOx emissions, or emissions. I mean, on an annual basis, we require them to test up for all pollutants, including the SOx. We require them to establish limits for these pollutants. We wanted to make sure that the pH limit and the flow rate that they established during the source test, where they have demonstrated compliance, that the scrubber is operating at or above those values. So as far as the emissions monitoring, is built into their permit, and we closely monitor it, and they are required to submit us the reports as well on each of these items, or any kind of breakdowns or anything. So the next slide, I'm going to pass on to Mark to discuss the emissions.
All right, thanks, Jag. Appreciate it. Yeah, like Jess mentioned, I'm just going to kind of briefly touch upon DTE and how it fits into the overall emissions profile for the Stockton community. So as you can see on this graphic here, if we're looking at some of the major pollutants in the community, if we're taking a look at NOx, DTE is about 9% of the emissions. On-road mobile sources account for about 42%, off-road mobile sources 43%, and the remainder is made up from stationary sources or other area-wide sources. We take a look at VOCs. DTE is a very minimal contributor to VOC in the community. On-road mobile sources and off-road mobile sources each account for about a quarter of VOCs. Area-wide is around 38%, and all of the other stationary sources account for around 11%. Taking a look at PM2.5, DTE accounts for about 8% of emissions. On-road mobile sources account for about 13%, and off-road mobile sources account for around 15%. Other stationary sources 11%, and area-wide sources over half. Taking a little more look at some of the top sources in the community for NOx and PM2.5. The largest source of NOx is from heavy-duty trucks, which emit about 196 tons per year of NOx, followed by light-duty vehicles, which account for around 166 tons per year. Trains account for around 148 tons, and then other off-road mobile equipment accounts for around 140 tons. Area-wide fuel combustion in various manufacturing processes accounts for around 121 tons per year. Ocean-going vessels account for 113 tons per year, and DTE accounts for just over 100 tons per year. Looking at PM 2.5, we can see that cooking is actually the highest emission source within the community, with around 38 tons per year of emissions, followed by on-road mobile vehicles with 22 tons, trains and ocean-going vessels with 18 tons. Dust from paved roads within the community boundaries account for around 14 tons. Various residential fuel combustion accounts for around 13 tons, and DTE accounts for around 12 tons. So just to kind of give a brief intro into the compliance, Sam's going to go more in depth, but just talking about our procedures to how we verify the facility is following the conditions set on their permit, as well as other various, district, state, or federal requirements that might be placed on them. We verify all of that through inspections at the facility. In the SERP that was established with the community, the district committed to enhanced inspection frequencies at all facilities which had emissions-related violations within the 3 years prior to the adoption of the SERP. So in DTE's case, they had an emission violation in 2019 related to the way the ash from a silo was vented, not matching the equipment description. And therefore, they have been set to a 6-month frequency for inspections since the SERP was established. And in that time, no additional emission violations have been found. So with that, I will send it over to Sam to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what we do during an inspection.
All right, thanks, Mark. So what is the compliance inspection process? Essentially, what we're going to do as compliance staff is inspectors go to the facility to investigate how the facility is operating, and we take that time to physically observe and put eyes on the equipment and the processes that they have going on there that are permitted, so we can ensure compliance with district issued permit to operate conditions. And really what that looks like is meeting with the facility contact and taking a tour of the facility, a pretty detailed tour. And so during that time, we're making sure that the equipment matches the descriptions on their permits. For instance, that the bag houses match the description and haven't been changed out without going through the proper permitting processes. In addition to that, for instance, they have bag houses for the Trona silos that Jag was mentioning, and we want to make sure that there's no visible emissions that are being emitted from those bag houses. Bag houses are essentially pretty efficient vacuum cleaners, so we don't want things blowing out of those. And they've got differential pressure gauges to make sure that they're operating in the manner that they're supposed to according to manufacturing specifications. We also, for instance, they've got emergency backup generators, and we want to make sure that those are all matching permit descriptions and that the hours are not being exceeded for their permit limits. So once we get through, a little further into that, we get to their continuous emissions monitoring system shack. Well, we call it a shack. It's a little studio where they've got their equipment in there. And so we'll inspect that to ensure that it's being maintained and operated properly. And that typically looks like checking their calibration gases to make sure that their expiration dates are within, that they haven't expired, and that also that they're pressurized properly and that their records show that the daily calibrations are being performed and that they are in calibration or that they're running a calibrated system. After the physical inspection, the kind of the tour of the facility, we typically go into their office where we can check operator logs and review their facility records, making sure that they're in compliance with throughput levels, for instance. And throughput really is having to do with, for instance, they're bringing in this woody waste or this biomass to be processed at their facility, and they have certain amounts that they can run through their boiler daily and annually, quarterly even. So we want to make sure that those limits are adhered to, and when they're not adhered to, that they're promptly and properly reported. And we'll talk about that a little further too. Also, we at the district observe third-party source tests, and I will touch on that a little further, but we're going to go to the next slide before that. So what is the required compliance reporting that the facility has to do? This facility, DTE, is a Title V facility, which essentially means that they have more stringent requirements. Their permit conditions are federally enforceable from the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So they're required to submit various reports to fulfill those requirements and the district requirements. Some of those reports that are submitted on a routine basis are done so annually or biannually or even quarterly. And so when we're there, we'll, or even when they're submitted to us back at the office, we'll review those reports to ensure that they show correct information and that they're complete. And when non-compliance is documented, we want to make sure that either enforcement action, appropriate enforcement action has been taken, or we have that opportunity to do so then. And when those instances of non-compliance do occur, the facility being a Title V facility, they're required to self-report those deviations, any deviations from their federally enforceable permit conditions to us at the district as soon as possible, but no later than 10 days after discovering such an instance. And so when that happens, they'll submit to us a deviation report that describes the event that they're in deviation from their permit conditions, how long they were out of compliance, when it was discovered, what they did and how they achieved compliance, the probable causes of their deviation, and what they have done or will do to correct and prevent those occurrences from happening in the future. Next slide, please, Mark. So we talked just real briefly about source testing 2 slides ago. And so what source testing is the biomass fire boiler is tested annually to ensure compliance with permit limits that they have for PM10 or particulate matter, 10 microns or smaller, for the oxides of nitrogen, the carbon monoxide, the VOCs, the oxides of sulfur, and ammonia. And those tests are performed by CARB certified third-party contractors in accordance with CARB approved methods for testing those types of pollutants. And we at the district have trained staff to both observe the third-party source tests while they're happening, which is a good way to keep the testers honest and make sure that they're performing those tests properly. And also our staff will review those source test results after they've been submitted to us. And according to the most recent source test, which was done April 19th of 2022, the district staff found that there were no compliance issues with those tests that were performed. And it's a real high view compliance tour there. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
I have a bunch. Just because I'm not familiar with this, I think. But does anybody else have questions? Anybody else want to ask a question?
Well, I do, but you go ahead, Debbie, you start.
So they are right now required to do every 6 months because of the violation they had in 2019.
Correct.
Why did the first violation why did that 2019 happen? Was it because somebody wasn't doing their job, or was it because they didn't know they had to do something a certain way, like procedures changed or something like that?
Yeah, my understanding is the process by which they were processing some of the ash changed, and they didn't upgrade the permit description ahead of time. They went ahead and made the change without notifying the district first and getting the proper authority to construct issued before that change was implemented. And so when we discovered it during an inspection, we issued a violation, and then they submitted the necessary applications to get that permit amended to properly reflect what was happening on the facility. And to do that, they had to go through, which Jag could talk about more, but they had to go through an evaluation before we could approve the application to make sure that we, that they were able to do what was happening.
Okay. And then are inspections announced?
No.
No. Good.
Yeah, it's the best way we can
Yeah.
observe the facility as they're operating, or in normal conditions.
Exactly. And then the third party inspector, who hires that person?
The third party contractor?
Right. They're doing tests, I guess. Who hires that third party tester?
Those testers are hired by the facility, but the testers have to be certified by CARB as approved testers.
Okay. And I think my last one, and I've got one more, but is there some wood that they can't burn?
Yes. If, for instance, pressure treated woods, woods that,
Yeah.
if it were lumber that had been painted, or if it were pressure treated, they couldn't burn that because of the metals that are in it. And with coatings, there's chemicals in there that can't be burned.
But like, can they burn eucalyptus, or they can burn any kind of tree, any kind of?
That's my understanding. Yes, the
Yeah.
natural bio waste is acceptable. And that's one thing I didn't mention in terms of going through records, is they do have requirements to test their fuel for the presence of heavy metals and other things such as asbestos. And they do that annually as well. And they take a representative sample of their fuel that's to be burned, and have another outside agent, or not agency, but company do the analysis of that fuel.
Okay. And then my last promise. How often does the non-compliance, excuse me, I can't read my writing. How often does the non-compliance self-reporting happen with them?
Well, it happens whenever there's a violation.
But I mean, you guys know them probably. Maybe Samuel knows them better since he's the person probably reviewing those. I don't know. But how often does that happen? How often do they have a violation that they self-report? And what kind of violation is that?
So they have to self-report pretty much all violations that have anything that's what's called federally enforceable on their permit, which for them is going to be quite a few of the conditions. They'd be required to self-report. And if they don't self-report it, they would receive an additional violation for failing to submit a report as required within 10 days of discovery.
Right. I understand that. I guess what I'm saying, what I'm asking is let's say the last year. Let's say, yeah, the last year. How many self-reportings have they had? Do you know?
Offhand, I mean, I can say offhand they've only had one violation in this past year, and it was for an administrative failing to submit an application within a required deadline situation. So
And that was self-reported type of thing?
that one was,
Not. Probably.
I think the thing is it's self-reported upon discovery. And so
Right.
we discovered it before they did in that case and issued a violation when we discovered it. And then they reported it quickly thereafter.
So if you found it, then wouldn't that set them up to be put on the track again to be even further, more inspected, I guess?
Well, like I said,
Because,
that's why they're on the 6-month inspection frequency.
oh, I thought it was because of the 2019 incident, not this latest incident.
Well,
It is, and Mark, we'll clarify. The inspection frequency is anytime, and help me, Mark, if I'm wrong. The inspection frequency is 6 months when there's an emissions violation. What you were just describing, if it's like if it's an administrative and we know whether that administrative violation actually resulted in more emissions or if they just like missed a deadline, they're not on the increased inspection frequency, but they're still issued a notice of violation.
correct. Yeah, that's correct. And that was the case in this case. They were late for a deadline on a submittal for an application.
Okay, and that's the only self-reporting or violation that you have found in this last year, last 2022. For
Yeah,
them.
so otherwise the facility also can have what's called breakdowns when there's an equipment malfunction. And so that's something where if there's something that goes wrong with a process, they have to call in a breakdown to us within an hour of something beginning to go wrong. And then we look into those to determine what happened and if whatever happened ends up being a violation of permit conditions or not in that case. I don't know offhand how many breakdowns they had in the previous year, but those are also something that could fall under the idea of being self-reported.
Debbie, oh, sorry. I will say 2 things. We report every year and we have a list that we presented to the group on every NOV, so notice of violation we issued in the entire boundary. And
So
we
that
have
would
that.
include DTE.
That would include these. Yep, exactly.
Okay,
So I'll drop that I'll drop that link in the chat so you guys can make sure you have access to that.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
Of
you
course.
so much
I know
for-
Margot said she had a question too.
Yes.
So Cynthia, do you mind if we go to Margot first? Because then it was before you raise your hand and then we'll go to you, Cynthia.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
My question's rather simplistic. So it sounds like it's clean wood. So is that wood from the orchards in our surrounding lands? Do they pay farmers to bring the wood to them? Where do they gather their fuel? How does that work? Do you know? Or is that beyond your scope?
Somewhat beyond. Some of it's municipal waste too. So the cities will, if they have fallen trees that need to be removed from city land or city properties, it can end up going there, being diverted to that facility. But I'm pretty sure that agricultural wood waste from orchards and around the area do go to DTE as well.
Correct. And from my understanding, and I don't know if our compliance or enforcement team have a better handle, we do have an alternatives to burning ag waste program at the district that's relatively new. But prior to that, the main way folks got rid of this wood was just to burn it openly in their field. So instead of just burning it openly in their field, they're bringing it in. I believe and this I might be wrong, this is just me speculating, I can double check and someone correct me. I believe just like anytime you drop off waste at a facility, I believe the grower pays a fee. Like usually you pay like a tipping fee when you drop something off. And then that's how it's because they're doing a service and getting rid of their woody waste for them, obviously in a much more controlled environment than just like burning it in the field.
Okay,
I'm not sure on that. I think
Is that the opposite? Maybe they get paid to do it?
they might get paid. I think it's minimal though. But
Okay.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll check on that for sure, just because that's a great question, Margot, but certainly the alternative, if there is now more alternatives out there, and including chipping and some things that the district's helping out with, that's relatively new to the world of getting rid of waste material, but primarily otherwise would have been burned kind of just in the field.
Thank you.
And now, Cynthia, thank you for being patient.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. I definitely have some very related questions to what other folks have been asking. I think my first question is the data that was shown on slide 6. Is that based on like a 5-year average, 1-year average? Just interested on what the time frame is for that data that was collected.
That is a 1-year inventory. But we do have, it's relatively the same for 5 years. We actually just in putting this together, and Mark, can you go to that slide, please? Yes. And putting this together, we did, sorry, you're talking about this slide, correct? 6, the one before this one?
Yes.
Awesome, yeah. And putting this together, it's actually relatively flat across the board. DTE's emissions don't change much from year to year within a 5-year period. So yeah, this is pretty standard, but this happens to just be a 1-year look at a snapshot of an inventory.
Cool. That sounds good. And then I had a follow-up question on some of the like self-reporting and modeling. I know you all mentioned a lot of different kinds of modeling that's happening, like the continuous emissions monitors. Is that a self-reported? Do they read off of those monitors and then report it to you all? Do you all only look at them when the inspections are done? Just kind of curious on how often those are checked.
Yeah, so those are actually pulled by a district system. And so it's kind of set up with alerts. If there is an exceedance of a permit limit, we actually get an alert on our end notifying us that a facility had an exceedance. But then also, like I said, we, like Sam mentioned, we do verify in real time on site that everything is operating properly at the time of inspection.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. That's really helpful.
Also to add, in a given hour, at least one sample is taken every 15 minutes and it's sampled, tested, and reported and recorded. So that's how same system works, is basically in 1 hour they take like more than 4 readings, and sample is grabbed, checked, recorded, and then reported to the district. So it's every 15 minutes, at least once.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Are all those samples like recorded in this data that's shown? Are you guys taking an average? Just kind of interested in how that works a little bit more. Thanks for that additional information.
You're talking about, so this inventory that we're showing here?
Yeah, is that the 15? You mentioned one sample is taken almost every 15 minutes. Is that like averaged out, or is it just flat out use every?
That's a continuous emissions monitoring system. Okay. But this slide is the annual data.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah, so that annual data is reported. So every facility in the Valley has to report their emissions data to our permits technical services team on an annual basis. And so they report kind of their throughput, or essentially like what they do. We, based on all the engineering and permitting, we know those, we have calculations, and we actually determine based on their actions and their reporting and what they're able to report to us, what their inventory is, and report that to the state actually every year.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Yeah, definitely like Debbie, have a whole list of questions too. So thanks for taking the time to answer these. But I know Margot had brought up like agricultural waste, and I know we're phasing that out here pretty soon. Is there any concern that there's going to be an increase of the agricultural waste being brought into DT Stockton? Is there any concern about, the pesticides and or herbicides that are used on those like orchards and vineyards and things like that being burnt up and getting into our air. Is that a concern at all? Just kind of twofold question, but wanted to know if that's something you all are thinking about. Something that we're definitely thinking about.
Good questions.
If I may, I know I don't know a whole lot about the program, anyway, a lot of the alternative to ag burning grant programs will reincorporate that chipped material into the soil. It's kind of a carbon sequestration, if you will. So not all of that material is making it to DTE. And as far as the pesticides and herbicides, I don't have the information for that, but I just wanted to mention that a lot of that is incorporated into the soil.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so you guys aren't anticipating any increased birding now that it's all going to be phased out? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, the facility has throughput limits already in place. And so regardless of any changes to the economics of burning ag waste, in open fields or anything like that, the throughput limits in place are what they have to adhere to. And so just because more people might be interested in taking their waste there doesn't mean that DTE will be given the ability to process it. If they wanted to change the throughputs, they would have to submit an application and go through a whole rigorous process, which would be a whole other story. And so in the current situation, we're going to hold them when we do an inspection. If we were to see that they had burned more material than they were allowed to burn on a throughput limit on a permit, they'd receive a violation for that.
Okay. And how is that tested actually? Now that you kind of bring that up.
How is what tested?
That they burnt more than what is allowed in their permit.
Like their throughput, how do we know they're not going over their throughput limit?
Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we verify it for them through a scale when they receive the material.
Yeah, they do a scale. I think they call it a metering bin. So that's how much they're feeding or metering into their boiler. So that's for the actual boiler portion. And then they also have the receiving portion where they're getting truckloads, and they have a certain area that they can store a certain amount that they're allowed to store in terms of square footage on their property. But then once it gets to their facility, it's weighed and otherwise accounted for. And then from there, it's conveyed over to the boiler and metered accordingly. And so those records are all part of what we're reviewing during our inspections.
Awesome. Thanks, Samuel. That's really helpful. I think I just have like 2 more questions. Let's see. Yeah, we're just interested in the status of the best available control technology for DT Stockton and if there's any ERCs being used by them. Yeah, just a general question on that, what their status is on ERCs and backed.
As far as the best available control technology, I think they already use like I said, the state-of-the-art technologies to reduce NOx emissions. Sorbent injection, Trona type injection system followed by the multi-clones and the ESP, which is electrostatic precipitator, are this again the state-of-the-art technologies to reduce particulate matter emissions. I think this plant has this is one of probably, I think this is the only plant that has a selective catalytic reduction system, which is considered to be the best in reducing NOx emissions. On top of it, the plant also has a wet scrubber to remove any kind of residual acid gases or any kind of sulfur compounds. So all in all, I can say that this plant is equipped with the best available control technologies already. So
Great, thank you. And any, do any of you know if any emission reductions credits are used by this facility?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, go ahead, Jag, if you have an answer.
Yeah, no, no, I'm not aware of having them use any kind of ERCs or offsets or anything like that.
Awesome. Is there somebody in your staff who might know that we could potentially follow up with?
I can, yeah, what if I'll note as an action item just to confirm a couple of the things there were questions on today, and we'll note that as one of them, Cynthia.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So I think that, yeah, wraps up my questions. Thank you for taking the time to answer them and allowing me to learn more about DT Stockton.
Absolutely.
Any other, I want to do a quick time check. I know most of my team, I know that when they get off, so I know that they can stay on a little longer if we need to. So we're happy, I think at least a few of us can stay on and answer any more questions if there are any. But I do want to steal 2 seconds of your time. It will be more of a follow-up at this point, because I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to acknowledge something. So if there's no questions, I kind of want to acknowledge where we're at with the overall process, and then I'll just confirm that we'll work with Debbie on scheduling future meetings. All right, awesome. Okay, really quickly, I'm going to share my screen. We will screenshot this and post this to the subcommittee site, so you can go ahead and have a copy of this to check out at any time. My screen has, are you seeing this? My cursor moving around in circles? Okay, awesome. My screen is showing that table that Mark presented earlier, was sort of how we were trying, we didn't exactly go in order, but it was how we were trying to prioritize a bit of what we've talked about so far. So we talked about heavy duty trucks. The X doesn't mean we're done, just FYI, it just means we've at least had that initial conversation, right? We talked about road dust. We talked today about biomass. There's definitely a few remaining topics. There was one that we've already said would be the next meeting, and it's the indirect source review rule, which is related to trucks pretty heavily, right? And just as a quick reminder, that is the rule about new developments, including warehouses in any community in the Valley, but certainly in here. So the CSC has asked us to walk through the rule, discuss the requirements of the rule at the facilities, and then discuss similar rules in other air districts. So I just wanted to note that we have not forgotten. That is definitely our next topic. I don't want to take up too much time today to like sort the rest of these, but I'll just acknowledge that if we wanted to hit sort of the other higher emitting sources in the area, we still have a bunch of discussions in the future about off-road vehicles, which can include trains and other equipment, as well as ocean-going vessels and cooking. So these are kind of high priority topics I know for all of you. I just want you to know we'll work with Debbie on scheduling them, and certainly open to any feedback from any of you all on those as we move forward. So
absolutely.
Awesome.
Jessica, I can answer the offset question.
Excellent. Thanks, James.
Yeah, when they originally, offsets are triggered when you install new equipment or have an increase in emissions. So when when this plan originally was installed, they triggered offsets and they supplied ERCs, so that there was there were ERCs supplied for this facility.
Good to know. Thanks, James. Cynthia, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, like I said, I will post this so we kind of have a plan moving forward. I want to give a huge thank you to Jag and to Sam and to Mark for presenting and answering the questions. Huge thanks to all of you for being here, but certainly to Debbie for leading, and Margot and Cynthia for their supporting great questions. We love this meeting. I think it's just such a great time to dig deep into things. So we're eager for the next one. And I just wanted to thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Jess.
Have a great night,
Thank you all
everyone.
for great questions.
Oh yeah, so good.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank
There,
you.
everyone.
Good night.